Just a few days ago, I posted an article to my blog titled 12 Things You Need to Know About Your Preacher. It got a tremendous response with over 1,000 shares just within the span of about 4 days. I even had a minister friend of mine contact me about translating it into Spanish. So I think it touched a nerve for a lot of folks. And I think it's something with which most ministers and their families can identify. So I'm not going to rehash the article here. If you'd like to read it, I'll include the link. But that having been said, I'd like to include 3 of those issues and how you can fix them. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because a lot of guys are leaving ministry more now than ever. Statistics indicate that only 1 in 10 ministers will actually retire from ministry. A little less than half on average won't last 5 years. 50% of ministers surveyed just a couple of years ago said they wish they could leave ministry and do something else. It's a tough job, and what I'd like to do is call attention to a few specific areas where people can improve their relationship with their minister. First of all, the minister and his wife are lonely. They are almost certainly the loneliest members of your congregation. People don't invite them out. It could be for any number of reasons. Maybe the members participate in behaviors they think are going to meet with the minister's disapproval. Could be that they drink alcohol in the privacy of their homes. It might be movies or television shows they watch or language that they use when they're not at church on their best behavior. A few years ago, my family and I visited some friends from our congregation, and the husband let it slip that they were big fans of the TV show Breaking Bad. His wife rebuked him on the spot and said, "Don't tell our preacher we watched that." Well, guess what, guys? There are some preachers who are puritanical and holier than thou. But chances are that your minister and his family are dying to spend time with you. This is especially important because ministers are on Facebook just like everyone else. And FOMO is a real thing. FOMO, for those of you who may not know, is fear of missing out. And in social media, ministers see families going out to eat on Sundays, going to birthday parties, planning trips and vacations with one another, people's kids playing together. And he does it from the comforts of his living room because he and his family didn't get an invitation. And his wife is just as lonely as he is. She's going to be left out too. If the minister is the loneliest person in the congregation, his wife is going to be a second place in a photo finish. So the easy fix for this is just include him in things. Make sure that he's treated just like everyone else. Now, this doesn't mean worship the ground that he walks on or put him up on a pedestal. That's going too far the opposite direction. Just treat him and his family like regular people. In fact, follow the example of the Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, Paul says, "Therefore encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing." This includes the minister just as much as it does anyone else. Second, the minister gets a lot of criticism. The preacher is going to be blamed for a lot of things, even though he may not be responsible. For instance, if the church isn't growing, a lot of people assume that it's the preacher's fault. It couldn't possibly be because 90% of the congregation sit on their hands and have never invited a family member, friend, or coworker to church. Most people couldn't give a thorough biblical definition of evangelism if their eternal souls depended on it. But for some reason, it's the preacher's responsibility to grow a congregation, even though the New Testament makes it clear, repeatedly, that the work of evangelism is for everyone who identifies as a Christian. In his closing words in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you." Notice that he doesn't say, "Now guys, make sure you equip this special class of believers called ministers to do this work because they're going to get paid for it." Absolutely not. That is something that is expected of every Christian. Now, church growth is just one example. We could cite other things like, the minister doesn't preach the way I like. He doesn't use the same translation I do. I don't like his PowerPoint slides. He doesn't shake my hand every service. He made a joke about my favorite sports team. These are absolutely trivial. But because of things like this, ministers deal with a lot of criticism and therefore discouragement. Now, I know this will come as a surprise to you, but a lot of people in our world like to complain. And along with your elders, your preacher's going to get a lot of it. Now, here's the easy fix. Give him and other leaders like elders and deacons encouragement, and don't demand more from them than you demand from anyone else. Every Christian is called to imitate the example of Christ. In other words, we are each called to imitate perfection. We should be busy making sure we live up to the standard that Christ sets. If we're going to take the time to complain about somebody else, then we'd better have a good reason. There's a principle in a story that Jesus told about specks and planks that probably applies here. Third, the minister is worried about his family, and for good reason. Ministry is a round-the-clock job. You're always on call, and sometimes this includes vacations. I've heard stories of preachers having to cut vacations short because of something that happened to a church member. Every minister has had family time interrupted by other people's needs or wants. You add this to the fact that the minister's family is in a fishbowl and gets an overabundance of watchful eyes, lots of criticism, and he's frequently left out of social events. Yeah, this affects him and his family. You can imagine why some preachers' kids grow resentful of their church and other Christians. They have to share their dad with other people. They watch their parents get criticized frequently, and they get criticized because you can rebuke the minister's children to send a message to the rest of the youth. And it's safe because if the minister gets mad and leaves, you just hire another minister. But if a member gets mad and leaves, whoa now, because now you've got a problem. You'll actually have to get up off your tail and do some evangelism, because it's a lot harder to do a Bible study and convert someone and baptize them than it is to take out a preacher wanted ad. You know, there are a lot of ministers' kids who leave Christianity because of other Christians. Now, that's a terrible excuse, but it is reality. I have a good friend who has two of the best kids in the world, and they both identify as atheists now. And the reason why is because my friend is a minister, and his kids are tired of how their family has been treated by churches in the past. In my own experience years ago, we were driving home from church on a Sunday night, and our middle child broke into tears and started sobbing because of how my wife and I had been treated at this particular congregation where we served. And it's sad but true, but lots of ministers have to work twice as hard with their own families as anyone else does with theirs. So here's the fix. Treat your minister with respect. Be mindful of his family. I doubt very many people would cut short a vacation or cancel family time for anyone unless it was a dire personal emergency. So don't ask your minister to do that. Recognize that his wife and kids need some of his time too, and be as careful with your criticism of the minister as his family as you would with any other person. Don't make them objects of worship, but don't make examples out of them either. Ministers today have it pretty easy compared to guys like Peter, John, and Paul. In the U.S., we don't have an oppressive government trying to restrict our freedom of speech. We probably aren't going to be physically assaulted for our faith. We aren't going to go to prison for exercising our freedom of religion. In other nations, this does happen, and we need to pray for Christians in those countries. But that doesn't mean that ministers here have it easy, because leadership is never easy. That's why I'd like to conclude with a couple of Bible verses for us to consider. The writer of Hebrews actually tells his fellow believers that they need to spend some time thinking about how they can encourage one another. In Hebrews 10, verse 24. In Romans 1, 11, and 12, the Apostle Paul looked forward to spending time with his fellow Christians in Rome so that they could mutually encourage one another. Now, imagine a place where everyone encourages one another. Instead of complaining about things, people take initiative and try to fix problems themselves. Instead of waiting for opportunities to tear other people down, they make opportunities to lift others up. Dishonesty, gossip, slander, elitism, these are universally seen as ugly, and they are unwelcome. Wouldn't that be a wonderful place to be? Your minister didn't go into preaching because of the paycheck. Very likely, he did it because he cares about other people. And if he's a good minister, he cares about you. So why don't you follow his example and see what kind of wonderful place your church can become? Not just for you, but for your minister too.